Welcome. Welcome to the session where we're going to be talking about the Kaplan Business School Data Ethics course, and we're going to be talking to Lisa as well about the industry perspective. So I'm just going to start off, as I did with John's session, briefly introducing the Data 4300 Data Security and Ethics course, which is being offered by Kaplan Business School, and the topic of data ethics in general. So data security and ethics, why is it important? And I'm just going to, I'm going to stop sharing because I'd like to actually share an image with you, and I'm going to bring it up in a different slide deck, which I think is really quite topical given current events. And the first image I wanted to share with you, and the first quote, is that platforms and algorithms that promise to improve our lives, and by that I mean things like social media, other technologies and algorithms and search engines and Google that are meant to make our life better, more convenient, that are meant to connect us, can actually magnify the worst of human tendencies. They can incite violence, they can deepen divisions, and they can actually even undermine our sense of what is true and false. And I think if you've been watching the news lately, you've seen this at play. And interestingly, this quote was from Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. So this is kind of the setting under which I want to ask the following question. And I want to go back to a business setting because, you know, the students that we have in our Master of Business Analytics are going to want to be business analysts or data analysts or data scientists within business. So I'd like to take you to a place and ask you to imagine that you are working for a company currently investing in facial recognition technology. What risks does your company face in using this data? And I raise this because of, again, recent developments. After the riots that we've seen in the US, facial recognition technology has come up under fire because of racial bias due to inaccurate facial matches, particularly when it comes to people of color. And almost instantly, there was a reaction from industry. It was a reaction from the big tech giants. Large companies like Google, AWS, Microsoft, IBM have come to recognize that there are reputational risks associated with the use of this technology. So it's not even just about being right or wrong. It's about the commercial impact of not considering data ethics and how data is used. Now, I'm going to just take a step back and ask, how do companies actually use data? Because some of the people in our audience, this is really new to them. So I want to start by saying that data is a strategic business asset. According to certain surveys, a company knowing your home address is worth $250 to that company. So whenever you put down your home address, you are giving $250 to any company that you're giving that information to. There are various reasons for this. You can use this information to predict socioeconomic status, education, demographics, etc. So data is really, really valuable to companies. Interestingly, in a survey in 2019, 70% of customers said that they would share more of their data for more convenience or free goods. So there's a willingness on the part of consumers to share data. But there's also a risk, and that's why we get into things like data rights. Should we have rights over our data? You would have no doubt heard about Cambridge Analytica, which was accused of interfering with the US election in 2016. According to them, they had about 5,000 data points on about 230 million American voters, and they used that information in certain ways. And there is legislation coming up now. You would have maybe heard about the GDPR in Europe, which actually incorporates within it the right to be forgotten, erasure. So I think that this issue of data rights is becoming more and more pertinent. So what is data ethics? What is data ethics about? Very simply, it's just about wrong or right conduct in relation to data. It sounds really simple, but it's not. It incorporates many elements, such as data security. How do you protect your data? So the recent COVID app, data security and data privacy, the point below, came up as a really big issue. Data privacy is all about controlling how your personal data is used and collected. So when the COVID app came out in Australia, there was a lot of questions being asked about the fact that this data was actually being stored by Amazon in the US offshore. So this is becoming a really big issue. And I'm going to talk to Lisa about An extension of this, something called data governance, which has various definitions and is quite complex, but is really about managing the quality of data within an organization. So according to managers around the world in a survey last year, data governance were actually part of the top 5 strategic initiatives for global firms. So this is a big issue. And just very quickly to tell you what our subject looks at, it looks at data ethics. It starts off by looking at data monetization. It looks at frameworks, or it gives students a framework, a cheat sheet, a formula almost to address security, privacy, and ethical issues related to data, and also data governance. It teases out this tension between, within a company, compliance and innovation. There are people within a company who are innovating, who are creating new technology. And on the other hand, there are people who need to take care of compliance and make sure that the company is doing the right thing. And the tension between these groups is often really, really complex. So we look at that as well. We look at society, government, and data ethics, that there's lots of things to explore there. How much data should a government gather to ensure the safety, the health of its population? Really contentious issue. And then we finish off by looking at how to develop a code of ethics for a business. And our assessment 3, to give you some perspective, actually asks students, through developing a code of conduct for a business around data ethics, to challenge the below statement, which is from an article that I shared with you at the beginning around facial recognition. There's an opinion that it's much more ethical to ban facial recognition than it is to try and create best practices. And we're going to get students to really challenge this statement and really try and think about ways that we can actually create best practices in this space. The topics are mirroring just what I showed you. So we start off by looking at you and your data. How today, what type of data have you given away without knowing? We look at the flip side. How do businesses use data that you give them? We look at social media and the internet. We look at businesses and data monetization, the tension between compliance and innovation. And then we get into existing legal frameworks, national security, encryption and blockchain, and society and data ethics. Really interesting things in the last topic around smart cities and how data can drive those. So it's really not a subject which is particularly technical. It's probably a lot more high level and strategic in its focus. And I'm really excited. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm really excited to pass over to Lisa. And I'm going to, Lisa, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly introduce you because your experience in this field is really, really phenomenal. So she's going to, thanks, Lisa. She's got a really diverse legal and health background, and she's got significant expertise in actually advising business leaders in a variety of complex health policy, legal and ethical issues. She's a top contributor in the fields of medical research, technology ethics, data privacy, data ethics, and data governance. And she's led and developed high-performance teams. It's fascinating that she's currently actually heading up a team that's working on the privacy impact assessment framework for Qantas. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to just start off maybe with a poll, just for Kieran to launch a poll for our audience, and I'm going to launch in with a bit of a question for you. So there's 2 questions there if you want to answer them. So the first one is, what percentage of all data in the world do you think was generated in the last 2 years, if you had to guess? And then question 2 is saying companies gather and sometimes pay for your data in order to, and you can select an option there as well. So just to preempt a little bit of what Lisa is going to be talking about. So submit your answers, and as you do, Lisa, I'd like to ask you the first question, and it's a pretty basic one just to let our audience know what some of these things are. If you had to explain it, why do you think data privacy, security, and the ethical use of data is so important in the current modern world?
Great, thank you. Put very, very simply, doing the right thing matters. In a nutshell, that's why I think it's important. But it matters across so many areas in the modern world. And we look at human rights and civil rights, especially lately in the media, all the way over to animal welfare, charity and philanthropy. So the human impulse to do what is right by others also transcends into the use of people's data. So it's not just about the individual, it's about the information that we hold about them. And so data ethics highlights the complexity of the ethical challenges posed by data science and big data analytics, because it is complex. And if anyone says they've got the answer, I don't believe them, because it takes rigor, it takes discussion. And so while we know that data analysis isn't new, we now have the ability to quickly process huge amounts of data. And so the ease of these efforts creates a multitude of issues relating to ethics, privacy, and security. At the end of the day, we want to keep using data. And so if we want to do this, trust and transparency are absolutely crucial in the consideration of the ethics of data use. And it's crucial to ensure people remain comfortable with how organizations collect and use the data. Because at the end of the day, if the people aren't on board, they can withdraw their data, and then we can't, do some of the most amazing things that we can do with data. And I'm a big believer that data is going to solve a lot of the world's problems. Also, the law's not keeping up with advances in technology, and I think that's a big point to make. So we need to think beyond compliance, what's legal, what's not legal, and protect people's data and also the organizations we work in. So put very simply, in the past, we've often raced through the could we question, meaning we've assessed the technical feasibility of a data use case. We've ensured that we get the tick of compliance and legal permission by asking, are we allowed to do this? But moving forward, it's really important to ask the should we question. Is this the right thing to do, all things considered? And to bring it down to a sort of tangible example, I'm not sure how many people are fans of Jurassic Park here or have some sort of a memory of the general nature of the movie. But a line in that movie from one of the mathematicians really resonates with me. And he contemplates a technological feat of resurrecting dinosaurs. And he concludes, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And so that, in a nutshell, is why this is really important in the modern world.
Wow, thank you
so
so
much. Resurrect dinosaurs.
Yeah, because of the destruction they can wreak. Kieran, do you mind sharing the results of the poll? And I just want to touch on something. Interestingly, most people guessed that it was quite high, but 90% of all data was generated in the last 2 years. This was from a 2019 survey. And yes, number two, all of those things are benefits of companies gathering your data for them. And Lisa, I want to go back to what you just said when you talked about trust. Just as during the global financial crisis, people lost trust in the banks and ran on the banks to withdraw their money. Trust is quite a fragile thing, and customers could withdraw their data. So that's a really, really great point.
And it's a continual thing. You've got to maintain this idea that you are trustworthy. Trust is not something that can be obtained in an instant and then you've got it forever. It's a continuous thing. And you look at Facebook as a perfect example of the gaining and loss of trust.
Yeah, so I might just move on to question 3. I'll skip the second one and come back to it. Why is it so important for businesses to ensure data privacy, security, ethical use of data? Why is it important for businesses specifically to do this?
Yeah. So my view of data ethics, and maybe I'm biased, is that it's an enabler. I don't see it as unnecessary red tape. And the reason I see it that way is because it allows businesses to future-proof their investments in data and to build trust with customers. And so although you can't really put a price tag on ethics, we've definitely seen the negative impact of questionable ethics. So stock prices taking a dive, customers and also staff leaving, protests occurring, and other companies also restricting their ability to do business with one another. So without a doubt, there's the cost to unethical use of data. We've also seen that people really want to work for a company with a strong ethical code that stands for something. I mean, the recent walkouts in Facebook really revealed that the individual's sort of personal moral compass didn't align with the company. And so good people will leave. And in my view, as I mentioned before, doing the right thing is important, even if it sometimes means trading off profit. So we see the occasional story in the media of unethical use of data and the negative impacts. And we have to remember that it's usually minority and vulnerable groups that are negatively impacted. And to be a business that permits that, enables that, it's not, I don't think it's something any organization wants to be seen to be doing. And so we need to be doing better as a society. And as you mentioned before, facial recognition right now, it's in the spotlight, but it's been around in sort of ethical discourse for a while. So it's great that the movement recently has brought it to light. So my real strong view is that in the absence of ethical analysis or oversight of any industry, could possibly lead to big ramifications if we allow the unfettered use of these technologies.
Thanks, Lisa.
No problem.
Could you tell us what, in your experience, is data governance, and how does it relate to data privacy, security, and ethics?
Yeah, sure. So data governance, as you mentioned before, I mean, there's 101 definitions about what exactly data governance is. But for me, in a business context, data governance, it really concerns the capability that enables the business to ensure that they've got high quality data throughout the complete life cycle of the data, through collection, storage, sharing, use, everything. And that all the right controls are implemented to support what the business needs. So that includes establishing processes to ensure proper data management, and procedures, and ensuring you've trained the right people to understand what they can and can't do with the data. At the end of the day, for any business, data is an asset, and it's becoming a major asset for most businesses. And so if you don't maximize the value of that asset through an effective data governance framework, then that's a loss of potential profit that you're going to be having.
Yeah, and
yeah,
can I just ask, I know this is not part of the questions, but is there a company or a set of companies where you think they've really got it right in the way that they treat their data, the data governance, security, privacy, and maybe a company that you think has really got it wrong?
I'm not sure if there's any companies that I would say I could point to and say they've got it all right, because again, if anyone puts up their hands because I know the answer, I've got it all, I think I wouldn't believe them. Companies that I think have got it wrong, I think it's about a balancing act. So if you put all your eggs in one basket and say, I'm going to maximize the value of my data and I'm going to set up all the infrastructure I need to make the most out of it, and I'm going to forego perhaps security, privacy, ethics, then they're good at one thing and maybe they've got the best infrastructure out there to effectively use their data. And I'd say some of the big data companies like Facebook and Twitter out there would, but maybe they might not have the better systems around the should we sort of capabilities around the actual use of that data and the sharing. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, as you mentioned, is one such company that I'm sure they figured out exactly how to harness their data. And I'm sure they knew exactly how to get the best quality and the best procedures in order to navigate it through. However, they've definitely failed on ethics. I would say Qantas is doing a great job, but everyone can do better, honestly.
Fantastic. Thank you. So now going to careers, and this is what our students are really interested in. What skills do you think graduates in data analytics, data science need to develop in order to be able to work with data in an ethical and safe way?
Yep. So moral imagination. And that's the ability to place yourselves in the shoes of others and assess impact and consequences. I think it's a skill that needs to be worked on. I don't think anyone is really naturally born with the moral imagination. It's you've got to give time. Confidence as well, the ability to speak up and challenge other people's views. That's really integral to having any discussion around ethics. Because most of the time, ethics exists in the gray. And so it's about finding what we're comfortable with and what we can reason with. So leading on to another skill is reasoning. And that's the ability to put forward a position, but basing it on some sort of logical argument, some sort of, I guess, premise that makes sense and that you can explain and justify. I would also say being open-minded. So in my view, open-mindedness is the ability to be challenged and be open to other people's perspectives. And I think that's really crucial, that you may have a view, but just remember it's just your view. And knowledge. So having a drive and a desire to go out and seek new information to potentially change your view. I think those are some really key skills that need to be developed. And I say skills because they're not things that if you feel you don't inherently have them now, that's not an issue. They're things to be learned.
Sure. I love that moral imagination. That's really powerful, and it's interesting that the skills you've listed are almost universal translational soft skills, not particularly the technical. If we drill down a little bit further, what career opportunities exist for graduates that have these skills as well as an understanding around data security, privacy, and ethics?
So right now, data is the present. It's the now. We know that big data is what a lot of companies are about. And emerging technologies that we haven't yet thought of that rely on this data is the future. So the core skills and understandings that I just mentioned will open you up to a broad range of career opportunities, from data-driven roles, policy, strategy, either in the private sector or government, research roles, marketing, even entrepreneurial roles. I find that a lot of some well-known entrepreneurs have very strong moral codes, and they're really good at justifying their reasoning, whether you agree with it or not. The most recent instance of Mark Zuckerberg versus the CEO of Twitter, I can't remember his name, and they're completely different stance about freedom of speech and the ethics of how we want to use data. But both of them seem to have confidence, good reasoning, knowledge, and a moral imagination because they can justify all the positions that they're putting forward. But I think in the current and in the next 5 to 10 years, an understanding of the ethical use of data is going to be integral to so many different industries because it touches on everything.
And it's interesting that you said Twitter and Facebook, and the fact that Twitter has actually chosen to censor certain statements made by politicians in the US. Yep. So things are changing in this space. What changes in data ethics and data rights in the security and privacy around data do you think students will see over the course of their career, over the next decades?
I think that as the technologies emerge, the battles will sort of come about, the discussions will change. And what we can and can't do with data will change. The laws will change, however, that's going to be the slowest thing. So therefore, ethical questions that require resolving or awareness are also going to change. And that for me is what makes this so exciting. You can be in this space and be experienced in data ethics, and you can jump around. So I've jumped around a fair bit, but always had the sort of commonality of ethics in my career choices. So preparing for an unknown future is really hard. I mean, we didn't know 10 years ago where we'd be today, but ethics and moral discourse, for instance, has existed since the time of Aristotle. And basic principles and methods of moral evaluation, they still stand today. How we reason right from wrong still exists. And so I think if you harness these core fundamentals, it'll empower you to face whatever future tech is thrown your way.
Yeah, and you just mentioned, your own experience, which has been diverse across sectors and different industries. Can you tell us a little bit about what type of jobs you've done and what type of jobs you've enjoyed the most?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a health and legal and ethics background, and so I viewed myself going into just health ethics and being quite clear cut there. So I started out in genomics or genetics, and navigating the ethical and legal issues around genomic research, especially around not only the sort of undertaking of research around consent, but what do we do with the information that's generated from sequencing someone's whole genome? So fascinating stuff for me. And then from there, I went on to mental health, specifically around the forensic mental health, so people who've committed crimes but who have pre-existing mental health conditions, and navigating the ethical policy considerations from a government perspective around that area, which again is very niche and very fascinating, but it's about ethical reasoning again. Should we be doing this? Should we not? Whose rights and freedoms are we taking away? Who are we protecting? And what are the trade-offs? And then I jumped into managing a big database for general practitioner health data across Australia. And so that was more of a data governance style role. And then now jumped into a completely non-health industry at an airline, which if you'd asked me 5 years ago, would you ever be working for Qantas? I would have laughed because I could have never seen the existence of ethics or data ethics at an airline. It just didn't come up as a possibility. So anywhere where there's a tension, and I call it a sexy tension, between what we want to be doing and what we potentially can't do, and where technology is pushing back against what we're comfortable with, that's the space that I find really interesting to work with. And I think that everyone's different opinions, whether I agree with them or not, it's fantastic to work in any industry where you can raise those opinions and you can have that discussion, because that's how we move forward. And that's how we find the best product or the best solution, is to kind of really have a good discussion about it.
Wow, fantastic. And what we'll do now, Lisa, is talk a little bit more about personal attributes and skills, and we've touched on it already. I'm going to ask Kieran to launch a poll, and the poll is asking, according to a 2020 LinkedIn survey, it seems now we get all of our survey data from LinkedIn, which of the below skills is not in the top 15? Both hard and soft skills. So this is a combination of both hard and soft skills. So you're picking out the skill that was not identified as a top soft and hard skill in the most recent LinkedIn survey. So I think this one is actually quite difficult because all of those are really important. And as people are filling that out, maybe if we can get a little bit deeper down into kind of personal attributes and skills that you develop. As you said, Lisa, you don't necessarily have to have them, but you may want to develop them. And for someone wanting to work in your field, in data ethics, what type of personal attributes do you think they need to develop?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, that if you don't have it now, that it doesn't matter. And so one that I can speak to firstly, which I definitely didn't have in the first few years of my career, is humility, knowing the limits of my knowledge and admitting so. And I think that's a really hard thing to do, just to reach a point and say, well, I don't know anymore, and holding back an opinion. And I think that's quite hard to do, because it makes you quite vulnerable, and that's okay. So I would say humility, once you grasp it, it's a great skill to have in this area. And feeding into that courage, to be wrong and to say so, and then to learn. That's only going to help you. It's for your own benefit to be able to do that. More positively, I think having just a curiosity about things and thinking broadly and asking questions in the room that no one else might be. So it's often really hard to do that, because you think, oh, well, that's a silly question, or, it's too broad, or it's too left field. But having, the ability to do that is going to help you out, because often it's the minority view, and that's really helpful, because sometimes when you have consensus decision making, we ignore a minority but valuable opinion, and that can, I guess, inhibit, a full range of possible solutions. And most importantly, I think when it comes to ethics, is respectfully confrontational. So being respectfully confrontational. It's okay to disagree, and in fact, it's actually required. You need to disagree. If everyone's in the room nodding your head saying, yes, I agree, even though deep down you don't, then I think that's something you need to work on, and definitely a skill you need to try. Just try it with your friends, try it with your parents. It's a really good way to try.
Fantastic. Kieran, did you want to share what everyone said around the skills? And those three are really fantastic to know. So interestingly, everyone thought that blockchain was the one that was not on the list, but it actually was. Understanding and skills in blockchain is becoming increasingly important. Really tough to see. And a lot of people said persuasion as well. The skill that is actually not in the list is critical thinking, which is really surprising, because critical thinking has traditionally always been at the top of these types of lists. But it's interesting to see that it's been beaten out by some technical skills, but also by things like persuasion. So going back to what you just said, Lisa, when you said respectfully disagreeing, or persuading, it seems like this is becoming a huge thing. And especially as we increasingly have divergent and very strong opinions, I think that's really, the respect part of that is really important.
And where it becomes hard is the ability to do that without authority, especially when you're starting out, the ability to put your hand up and disagree with someone who is in a senior position, that's really tough. And so, being comfortable to do that in a respectful way is is going to serve you well.
Great. I've got one more question that I'd like to ask you, Lisa, but I might throw in another one which I'd really love to hear your answer to. And while I do that, I just want to encourage everyone to throw some questions in the chat while I talk to Lisa, because I think there's a lot we can discuss. Lisa, given recent developments around Cambridge Analytica, around political elections and data warfare as well, that's been thrown around, when you think about businesses and their moral responsibility for taking into account the negative consequences of their platforms, that is not directly their fault. You know, things that people do on Twitter or Facebook are not directly Facebook's responsibility, but they're in charge of the platform and they're actually the arbiter of a lot of information that gets passed on to society at the moment. They're kind of the editor of the global newspaper. So back in the past, journalists used to take on this function of kind of curating knowledge and distributing it around in a way that benefited society. Now it's social media. Do you think that businesses and especially big tech companies have a responsibility to society? And if so, do you have any views on how that needs to be met? I know it's a really difficult and broad question, so please address it as you want. But
no, that's fine.
I think it'd be nice to discuss.
I've got a clear position on it, which is yes. I think if you're going to profit, and I think this is the key thing for me, if you're going to profit off people's data, if you're going to profit off a platform that people use, then you definitely have a moral responsibility to minimize harm that your platform that you created, that you manage, that you're responsible for, that it generates. Even if that's through passively in allowing people to do as they please, that is still enabling it, because in the absence of your platform, it would not exist. So I do not agree with Mark Zuckerberg's approach to just saying, even if I know that someone is posting something, and a politician, not just anyone, a politician is posting something that is absolutely incorrect, that they will not censor it, I think that's immoral. I think that's wrong. And I think he is washing his hands of the harm that is actually happening as a result of that. And not to get too political, but Trump's latest tweet about when the looting starts, the shooting starts, I mean, that is inciting violence, and Twitter's approach to censor it versus Facebook's approach to not, I think that's a clear distinction about what responsibility different companies take on it. And I'd like to see more of it.
And it's interesting to see if there's actually commercial payback from that to both those companies, depending on how they've acted.
Well, there has been. Facebook's had some of their people walk out and resign over what they've done over Black Lives Matter. So, yeah, I think we're going to see some changes about how people want to work in the companies they want to work for. I mean, you look at Monsanto, the big pharmaceutical company. Years ago, its reputation has been tarnished through all the, I guess, horrible things they've been doing as a pharmaceutical company. And people don't want to work for them.
I'm going to ask a question from the audience. And Mark Taylor, our head of sales, was here in the session last 2 weeks ago, where John Colombo was talking about data visualization. And Mark's question is that when you're using all this amazing software to visualize and present data in order to persuade, is there an ethical component to that? Should there be a disclaimer? Should there be a little star at the bottom that says not everything is as it appears? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think as a general thing, you look at the car side window, it says things may appear bigger than they actually are in the mirror. I think when you know that and this is about your own moral code, if you know that you're representing data in a way that may be misleading or, maybe inappropriate. And recently I saw the ABC News do it when they're looking at coronavirus cases. This is a really basic way. They had, 10,000, 100, 10,000, no, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million. And the distance between each of those numbers was the same. And so the graphs that were being displayed, they didn't look that different. So Australia didn't look that different from America. But if you actually stretched out to represent the actual distance between 1,000 and a million, it would be a true representation. So yes, I think that if you're going to use data to visualize something or to represent something, then you need to do it accurately. Or if you're not going to, be very clear that things may look bigger than they actually are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because we were talking about last week, John was talking about kind of the power of that. And as you said, Lisa, the legal frameworks are not going to catch up to this as fast as the business codes and codes of conduct that are developed. So
and we shouldn't necessarily wait for law. I mean, law is a very, very slow beast, and it's rigid. And in a space where technology is changing, maybe law is not the best solution. We don't want rigid codes necessarily that are just not changed, that we can't change, or we have to challenge them in the court system. I think we want something that's a bit softer, and that's why policy is really great, and codes of conduct and everything.
I might just ask a quick question from Dion, who put it in the chat. Just in general, what is your opinion about artificial intelligence and the ethics of data around artificial intelligence? So the quintessential case is the car, the driverless car, the ethics that's programmed into that car. And I guess also the fact that if we're training our artificial intelligence on data which is itself biased, we're probably already, ethically a little bit off.
Yeah, I think, so my view about artificial intelligence, I think it's the future, and I think we need to harness it, and we need to find the best way to move forward with it. However, I think people forget that humans are still developing this. And so, as you mentioned, we still put in our internal biases, and we still are flawed when we're creating it. And to wash your hands and say it's the technology that did this and not me, I think is not appropriate. The driverless car, I think it's fantastic. And I think it's a dual use technology, really. So, and I say dual use meaning it can be used for very good reasons. It can be used for bad. So the very good, we can, set up a whole system of cars that are set up to not crash ever. However, a bad use is you could hack a Tesla and, drive it remotely and, do something atrocious with it. And so how we use AI in sort of everyday lives it's a tricky question. I can't really answer it's a very loaded question, but I'm for it. It just has to be done well. And not everyone is an ethics expert.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to wait for more questions to come up. And there was a cheeky comment from Jeff, who's our finance analytics guy, who said that from 2015 to 2020, Facebook shares have increased 256%, whereas Twitter has decreased 19%. But of course, there are conflating factors there. It's not just because of ethical conduct. But I'm going to just go to the last question. And Lisa, this is usually the question the speakers enjoy the most because we ask you to reflect. And the question is that if you could go back and speak to your 20-year-old self at the beginning of your career, what 4 or 5 pieces of advice would you give yourself?
Yes. All right. So one big piece of advice I would give myself is that what others want and pursue doesn't mean it's a right fit or necessarily good for you. So, don't look to what road others are going down as a way to figure out your own path. Another piece I would have given myself is to learn more broadly. So not just about the specific area that you're in, as you never know how it will benefit you. Just go for the things you're interested in, not necessarily the things that you think are going to directly benefit your current role. And less about work, more experience life broadly. Life changes you. And so go live it, take a few risks, do something a bit different because it really changes your perspective and gives you growth in ways that you wouldn't have predicted. And on that, take more risks. I definitely would tell myself to take more risks because if I would have succeeded, fantastic. And if I didn't, I had enough time to fail, learn and grow and not do it again the next time. Yeah.
Great. It's fascinating that we get different advice from every people and that it's all so unique to everyone's experience. So thank you for sharing your experience. I think that some of the things we've discussed are so interesting and we'll continue discussing them in our subject. And we're really thrilled to have Lisa facilitating the subject in Sydney. Thank you so much. And I'll pass over to Kieran. Our pleasure to finish up and wrap up. Thanks, Kieran.
Great.
Thanks so much, guys. I am Kieran. I'm the alumni manager and also becoming a master of Zoom polling. So the KBS Analytics Month is a really great collaboration from our academics and amazing industry guests like Lisa. It's also produced by our Alumni Association. We support our graduates who are taking an interest in analytics. And we want to reach out because our Alumni Association is really a community for current students as well, for the companies we work with, for our academics. It's all about just sharing opportunities and learning. So everyone here, we want to involve you. We've also got our Wednesday night vodcasts. So that is a alumni interviewing other successful alumni about what is happening with our graduates. So we can learn what do they do after graduation. Tomorrow night, we've got an MBA graduate who is now a clinical support worker at St. Vincent's, and he'll be discussing how did an MBA lead him to excel in a clinical career. I'd also like to announce a really amazing milestone in our alumni relations is we've got a raise in our scholarship. It's now 30%. So if you've completed a degree from KBS, or if you're about to graduate, if you studied with Kaplan Professional or Kaplan International Languages, it's an amazing opportunity to further invest in yourself. These subjects, even that we're talking about today, they're relevant and really interesting. So I'm going to enter in my...
And just to finish off, thank you, Kieran. Next week we have Sushantha from DFS. He's the head of Global Innovation Strategy and Market Development. And the week after, and he'll be talking about our digital marketing and innovation subjects. And the week after we have Andres Ibar, who's the Vice President of Asset Management at Goldman Sachs. And he's going to be talking about analytics in accounting, finance, and economics. So thanks again, Lisa. Thank you, Kieran. And thank you to everyone for your time. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much.